I was reading this wild story about the early 90s when scientists built that massive enclosed ecological system out in the Arizona desert.
Oh, right. Biosphere 2.
Yeah, exactly, Biosphere 2. And the whole idea was to create this like perfect self-sustaining mini world.
Right, a totally controlled environment.
Exactly. So they had an ocean, they had a rainforest, a desert, the whole works. And they planted these really beautiful, fast-growing trees inside the dome.
And on paper, the conditions were completely flawless.
Perfect. I mean, perfect soil, perfect water distribution, optimal sunlight filtering right through the glass, everything a tree could possibly want.
Right, a botanical utopia.
But then something totally bizarre started happening. Long before these trees could even reach maturity, they just started collapsing,
Like just falling over.
literally falling over under their own weight. They would get to a certain height and then just snap.
Wow. Because the structural integrity of the wood just failed.
Exactly. And the reason it failed, and this is actually one of the most profound biological metaphors we have for human psychology, is because they omitted one thing.
Let me guess.
The wind. The wind. They controlled for every variable, but there was no wind inside the dome.
That is so fascinating because out in the natural world, wind provides resistance.
Right.
When a tree is buffeted by the wind, it actually experiences these tiny micro tears in its structure.
Like lifting weights almost.
Exactly like lifting weights. And in response to that stress, the tree produces something called reaction wood or stress wood. It alters its cellular composition to become denser, more flexible, and it forces the roots to grow deeper.
So without the stress of the wind, the Biosphere 2 trees grew super fast, but they were incredibly fragile.
The total lack of resistance is what actually destroyed them.
And the reason we are starting with this piece of botanical history today is that it perfectly mirrors the core thesis of a module we're doing a deep dive into today.
Yes, the excerpts from the program called The Inner Horizon,
Right, specifically their module on the art of bouncing back.
which is all about the architecture of resilience.
And let me tell you, their framework completely dismantles this popular hustle culture narrative of what it actually means for you to be strong.
Oh, absolutely. The source material is highly psychological, but it's deeply practical.
Right, because, we are culturally conditioned to view strength as being this impenetrable wall of steel. Like if you take a hit in life, you're supposed to just stand there totally rigid and unfeeling.
Yeah, we celebrate the knight in shining armor, or, the titanium vault.
Exactly, the vault that nothing can get into.
But the defining characteristic of that kind of armor is that it fundamentally does not give. It is designed to stop an incoming kinetic force completely dead in its tracks.
Right.
But the notes point out that if we map that onto human psychology, treating your mind like a titanium vault is just a recipe for catastrophic failure.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the underlying assumption in our society is that if you let a blow affect you, like if you admit to your boss or your partner that you're struggling, you've somehow failed the test.
Okay, shown weakness. That's the myth.
I see this constantly in the corporate world, and all over social media. It's this relentless glorification of the person who sleeps 3 hours a night, powers through multiple personal tragedies, and just shows up to work the next day completely unbothered.
We've basically equated emotional regulation with emotional suppression.
Yes, but the documentation in this Inner Horizon module argues that this version of resilience is a biological dead end.
It really is. The source claims that if the goal isn't to be an unfeeling wall of steel, you essentially have to unlearn your entire vocabulary surrounding human strength.
So if the source is saying resilience isn't about avoiding the hardship, do we just have to unlearn everything we've ever been taught?
Pretty much. And the unlearning process is incredibly uncomfortable because it requires us to abandon the illusion of control that rigidity gives us.
Because bracing yourself against a wall makes you feel safe.
Exactly. But the Inner Horizon introduces this stark contrast between two states being unbreakable versus being adaptable.
Unbreakable versus adaptable. Okay, break that down for me.
So unbreakable is a static state. Think of a really thick pane of glass. It's incredibly hard, it resists environmental changes, and it doesn't bend at all.
Not even a millimeter.
Right, but it has a fatal flaw. If you hit it with a force that exceeds its static threshold, it doesn't just fail, it shatters explosively.
Oh, wow.
There's no middle ground. It's perfectly whole 1 second, and then it is completely destroyed the next.
Which means the person in your office who seems the most stoic and unbothered is often the most at risk for a sudden total breakdown.
Exactly. They are the pane of glass.
They're just waiting for the rock that's heavy enough.
Yes, and that is exactly the opposite of the tree in the wind. The text pivots away from armor and focuses heavily on adaptability.
Which is dynamic.
Highly dynamic. Adaptability accommodates the reality of the incoming force. When the wind hits a strong tree, the tree doesn't attempt to stop the wind.
It can't.
Right, so it allows the kinetic energy to travel through its branches, down its trunk, and into its root system. It bends.
I want to push on that concept of bending, though, because I know to a lot of people listening to this deep dive right now, the idea of bending to a crisis sounds suspiciously like just giving up.
That's the common fear, yeah.
Like if a massive project you've poured your soul into gets abruptly canceled, or you get suddenly bad news about your health, telling someone to just bend sounds like telling them to lower their standards,
Yeah.
or just accept defeat.
Right, it feels passive.
Exactly. So how do we differentiate between adapting to a storm and just getting knocked flat by it?
That is the crucial friction point in the text. Yielding is not the same as collapsing.
Okay.
We have to look at the specific phrasing the psychological framework uses here. The goal is to return upright.
Return upright.
Yes. Bending is the mechanism of survival in the acute moment of stress, but it's part of a larger elastic process. The goal of true resilience is not to remain completely untouched or unmoved by the storm.
Because that's literally impossible.
Physically and emotionally impossible. If a loved one dies or you lose your career, you are going to be moved. The wind is going to push you.
Yeah.
Resilience is possessing the internal neurological mechanisms to find your center again after you have been moved.
So you allow the experience to move you, but you don't allow it to uproot you.
Beautifully put, yes.
It makes me think of something highly engineered. Like, think about the architecture of skyscrapers in major seismic zones.
Oh, like in Tokyo or LA.
Exactly, like the Mori Tower in Tokyo or the Wilshire Grand in Los Angeles. If you are a complete novice looking at an earthquake, your intuition tells you to build the stiffest, most unyielding concrete bunker possible.
You want a building that absolutely refuses to move.
Right. But structural engineers know that a rigid building is a doomed building.
Because of the energy?
Yes. The seismic energy of an earthquake is massive. If the building doesn't give, the energy has nowhere to go but into the destruction of the concrete itself.
It just absorbs it and shatters.
Exactly like the glass pane. So they engineer these massive structures to sway.
Right, they build in flexibility.
Yeah, they use these things called tuned mass dampers. They're like these giant pendulums inside the building. And they use base isolation systems made of rubber and lead that literally decouple the building from the ground.
That's incredible.
So the swaying isn't a design flaw. The swaying is the exact mechanism that keeps the building from snapping in half.
And that structural engineering principle maps perfectly onto our neurobiology.
Wait, really? How so?
Well, when we experience an acute crisis, our bodies generate a massive amount of internal seismic energy.
Like a biochemical earthquake.
Precisely. Your amygdala detects a threat and signals the hypothalamus, which activates your sympathetic nervous system.
That's the fight or flight response, right?
Exactly. Your adrenal glands pump out adrenaline and cortisol, your heart rate skyrockets, your breathing becomes shallow, and glucose is just dumped into your bloodstream.
Your body is preparing for war.
It's a massive energetic load designed to help you fight a predator or run away.
But most modern threats aren't predators. It's an email from your boss.
Right. And if you attempt to be the rigid concrete bunker in that moment, if you sit at your desk, clench your jaw, and pretend you aren't feeling this massive biochemical cocktail, that energy has nowhere to go.
You are literally internalizing the earthquake.
You are. And the resulting friction causes incredible wear and tear on your internal systems. It creates a state known as allostatic overload.
Allostatic overload. That sounds bad.
It's terrible for you. Chronic allostatic overload leads to a compromised immune system, cardiovascular issues, and really severe cognitive fatigue.
So what's the human equivalent of the tuned mass damper in the skyscraper?
It's the willingness to physically and emotionally process the stress. Crying, shaking, the need to step away and just breathe, the vocalization of frustration.
So doing all those things doesn't mean you're weak.
Not at all. These are not symptoms of a lack of resilience. The text makes it incredibly clear. Feeling overwhelmed is the prerequisite for resilience.
Yeah.
It is the tree bending. It's the building swaying to disperse the kinetic energy. If you don't allow the bend, you guarantee the snap.
That is just a massive paradigm shift. Acknowledging that you are struggling isn't a bug in the system. It's the primary feature of a resilient system.
Yeah.
But if we accept that the stoic unmoving wall is a myth, then the language we use in our daily lives needs a total
Oh,
overhaul
absolutely. The vocabulary has to change.
because we are constantly throwing around words that actively contradict this biology. And the source material highlights one word in particular that has completely hijacked the modern conversation around success.
Let me guess. Grit. Yes. The text brings in insights from researchers studying post-traumatic growth, and they draw a very sharp, deliberate line in the sand between grit and recovery.
Because words matter.
Language dictates behavior, and the word grit inherently implies friction.
Just think about the physical act of gritting your teeth.
Right. It's a mechanism of bone grinding against bone. It is pure tension.
And in the cultural zeitgeist, grit has basically been weaponized to mean white-knuckling the steering wheel, grinding through the obstacle, and aggressively ignoring the pain or exhaustion you're experiencing.
It is a totally combative posture against reality.
It's become a metric of corporate loyalty, too. Like, let's see who has the grit to work through the weekend to hit this completely artificial deadline.
It treats human beings like combustion engines that just need to be run hotter.
Exactly. But the psychological framework in the material completely redefines this landscape. The experts define resilience not as gritting your teeth, but as the active ability to experience stress, loss, or trauma, and then to adapt, reconnect, and rebuild.
They are stating unequivocally that resilience is fundamentally about recovery, not toughness.
Recovery, not toughness. Let's dig into that.
We really need to dissect the biology of why grit fails as a long-term strategy.
Okay, lay it on me.
So, grit relies on the sympathetic nervous system, that fight-or-flight state we just discussed. It requires immense amounts of willpower.
Which is finite.
Highly finite. Willpower is a heavily glucose-dependent resource in the prefrontal cortex. You can use grit for a short sprint.
Like escaping a burning building.
Exactly, or finishing the last mile of a marathon. But you cannot use grit as a baseline operational strategy for a 40-year career or a complex personal life.
Because you will just run out of fuel.
You will burn out completely. Recovery, on the other hand, requires a shift into the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest network.
Right.
Recovery openly acknowledges that depletion has occurred. It admits that damage was done.
It's like the difference between ignoring a sprained ankle so you can finish a 5K today versus stopping the race, resting, and doing physical therapy so you can actually walk properly for the next 3 decades of your life.
That's a perfect analogy. Grit wins the afternoon, recovery wins the decade.
Recovery wins the decade. I love that. And the material emphasizes this beautifully with the concept of rising again.
It sounds almost poetic, doesn't it?
It does, but it carries profound psychological weight because you physically cannot rise unless you have first fallen.
Which is such a vital point.
Right. By centering the definition of resilience on the act of rising again, the researchers completely normalize the act of falling.
Failing, being broken by an experience, being emotionally leveled, it's positioned not as an anomaly that you should hide, but as the mandatory starting point.
I want to stop on that for a second because I think that is incredibly liberating for anyone listening right now who feels like they are currently failing.
It takes the shame right out of the equation.
It really does. If you are exhausted, if your project failed, if your relationship ended, and you are barely functioning, you aren't lacking mental toughness.
You are simply in the phase of the cycle that mandates recovery.
You are on the ground, which is exactly where the process of rising has to begin.
Exactly. But the text also introduces a highly specific and honestly somewhat counterintuitive component to how that recovery actually happens.
Right, the 3 pillars.
Yes, the researchers outline 3 pillars of recovery: adapt, reconnect, and rebuild.
And it's that middle pillar, reconnect, that I found so fascinating. Because here's where it gets really interesting. It challenges almost all of our baseline instincts when we are wounded.
It absolutely does.
Because my instinct, and I think the instinct of most people listening, is that recovery is a deeply isolating process.
We want to hide.
Exactly. If you have the flu, you go into a dark room, close the door, and sleep. Or if you are emotionally burned out, or you're embarrassed by a massive public failure at work, the primal urge is to retreat. You want to hide in your apartment, turn off your phone, and just lick your wounds in private until you feel presentable again.
That is the universal human urge.
So why does this source material place reconnection on the exact same tier of importance as adapting and rebuilding? Why are we being told to go toward people when our biology is screaming at us to hide?
Because that urge to hide is actually an evolutionary mismatch.
A mismatch. How so?
Well, in the wild, if an animal is physically injured, it hides so it doesn't attract predators while it is weak.
Okay, that makes sense.
And we carry that ancient reptilian instinct. When we experience severe stress, psychological trauma, or deep embarrassment, our brain interprets that social pain using the exact same neural circuitry as physical pain.
So a failed project registers like a broken leg.
Literally, the brain says, we are wounded, we are vulnerable, we must hide. But psychological and emotional recovery is not like recovering from a viral infection. Trauma and severe stress are inherently isolating events.
They trap you in your own head.
Exactly. They trap you in your own subjective experience, making you feel like your specific flavor of anxiety or failure is entirely unique and therefore totally unshareable.
You essentially become an island of your own panic.
That's it, exactly. You become an island. And here is where the neuroscience of the vagus nerve comes in.
Okay, let's get into the neuroscience.
We are mammalian social primates. Our nervous systems do not operate in a vacuum. They are actually designed to co-regulate with the nervous systems of other humans.
Co-regulate.
Yes. This is the foundation of polyvagal theory. When you isolate yourself in that dark room after an emotional blow, your body might be physically resting, but your mind is still running the threat detection software on a loop.
The amygdala is still firing.
It's constantly scanning for danger. But when you reconnect, when you sit in a room with a trusted colleague or a friend or a partner, and you see their relaxed facial expressions, and you hear the calm prosody of their voice and experience their physical presence, your vagus nerve sends a powerful overriding signal to your brain and your heart.
It's like an all-clear signal.
Exactly. It literally slows your heart rate. It signals the immediate threat has passed. We are part of a tribe. It is safe to lower the shields and begin the metabolic process of rebuilding.
So by forcing yourself into isolation, you are essentially trapping yourself in the biochemical state of the trauma.
You're hitting the pause button on your own healing.
You are stalling the recovery process because your brain lacks the external social data it needs to realize the war is over.
Isolation maintains the sympathetic arousal. Reconnection triggers the parasympathetic release.
That is incredible. Which brings us to what might be the most challenging revelation in the entire text, especially for Western audiences.
Oh, the lone wolf myth.
Yes, the concept that true resilience is rarely, if ever, an individual achievement.
We are so obsessed with the lone wolf narrative.
We love it. The cowboy riding into the sunset alone, the solitary genius in the garage, the self-made billionaire. We just eat up the narrative of the one person who fought against all odds entirely on their own and conquered the world.
It makes for great movies, but terrible psychology.
Because this material looks at the empirical data of human survival and calls the lone wolf narrative a complete illusion. And they use a very visceral, large-scale example to prove it.
The sociology of natural disasters.
Right. The material references the patterns of behavior that emerge when communities are struck by catastrophic events.
Hurricanes, massive earthquakes, systemic fires.
Scenarios where the baseline infrastructure of daily life is just vaporized overnight. People lose their homes, their food, their communication networks, and their livelihoods in a matter of hours.
And pop culture tells us that in those moments, society instantly devolves into a Mad Max scenario.
Totally. We are taught that people will hoard their resources, turn on their neighbors, and that only the most rugged, paranoid, individually prepared survivalists will make it through.
Right, the guy with the bunker full of canned beans. But that concept is actually known in sociology as elite panic.
The elite panic.
Yeah, it's the assumption by authorities that the public will turn into a savage mob during a crisis. But decades of disaster sociology show the exact opposite is true.
People actually come together.
Yes. The text points out that in the wake of total devastation, communities almost instantaneously self-organize into highly effective pro-social support networks.
They don't turn on each other.
No, individuals do not retreat to guard their own broken possessions. Instead, they pool whatever meager resources they have.
So one family has a camp stove, another has uncontaminated water, a third has medical training.
And they merge. They share the labor of clearing debris, they set up communal kitchens, and they take turns caring for the traumatized and the elderly.
The critical takeaway from this research is that resilience is fundamentally relational.
Fundamental.
In a scenario where all individual safety nets are gone, where your personal bank account or your individual resume means absolutely nothing, Individual grit is mathematically insufficient to keep you alive.
You cannot individually grit a collapsed roof off your family.
No, you cannot individually grit a neighborhood back into existence. The only viable survival strategy is to completely blur the lines of individuality and lean heavily on the collective.
And the disaster scenario is just an extreme magnifier of a universal human truth. We bounce back significantly faster and with way fewer long-term psychological scars when we process trauma collectively rather than individually.
The researchers are basically forcing a shift in our lexicon from individual resilience to collective resilience.
Which is a huge shift.
Let's pull this out of the rubble of an earthquake, though, and drop it into like a mundane Tuesday afternoon at a corporate office.
Let's do it.
Because the mechanics are exactly the same. Let's say your department is facing a massive crisis. A product launch completely failed, the servers crashed, clients are furious, and rumor has it that severe layoffs are coming on Friday.
A classic high-stress environment.
The individual resilience mindset, the lone wolf approach, tells you to shut your office door.
It tells you to hoard information so you become indispensable.
Exactly. To subtly throw your colleagues under the bus to protect your own job, and to stay at your desk until 3 a.m., just to prove your individual worth to upper management.
And what happens to that department? It fractures.
It totally falls apart.
The psychological safety of the environment drops to absolute zero. Everyone's cortisol levels are spiked, leading to poor decision-making, tunnel vision, and a massive drop in creative problem-solving.
And the environment becomes highly toxic. Even if individuals survive the layoffs, the subsequent burnout and turnover will destroy the team anyway.
Exactly. Contrast that with collective resilience in the same office. What does that look like?
It looks like radical transparency.
Yes. The team lead calls everyone into a room and openly admits, "We are in serious trouble, and I don't have all the answers."
It looks like cross-training. Someone from marketing jumps in to help customer service triage the angry emails because they are drowning.
It looks like openly sharing the burden of the stress, checking on colleagues who look pale and saying, "Hey, go take a walk. I'll monitor the server for the next hour."
The team swarms the problem instead of isolating into defensive silos.
And the collective approach lowers the individual allostatic load. Because the threat is distributed across multiple nervous systems, no single individual is crushed by the weight of it.
The structural load is shared.
Plus, the psychological safety of the collective allows for cognitive flexibility. When you aren't terrified of being blamed, you are much more likely to suggest a novel, out-of-the-box solution to that server crash.
Individual fear breeds rigidity. Collective safety breeds adaptability.
Perfectly stated.
But I have to challenge this for a second because it sounds wonderful in theory, but implementing it violates deeply ingrained cultural dogmas.
Like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps.
Yes. So the whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps idea is actually counterproductive to true resilience.
Yeah.
Are we basically admitting that the fundamental motto of modern self-reliance is actually a psychological poison pill?
Well, let's look at the origin of that phrase because it is deeply ironic.
I love this part.
Pulling yourself up by your bootstraps was originally coined in the 19th century to describe an absolutely absurd, physically impossible task.
Because you literally cannot reach down, grab your own boots, and lift your own body off the ground.
It defies the laws of physics. Yet, over the last century, we somehow mutated this joke about an impossible task into an earnest, straight-faced model for mental health, career advancement, and emotional survival.
It's wild.
The source material isn't just suggesting that extreme self-reliance is inefficient. It is pointing out that it is biologically impossible. Believing you must survive solely on your own merit isolates you at the precise moment you most desperately need external resources.
But the barrier to entry for collective resilience is terrifying.
Because of vulnerability.
Yes, to tap into the power of the group, you have to do the one thing your ego is screaming at you not to do. You have to be vulnerable.
You have to look at a colleague or a partner or community member, drop the heavy familiar armor and say, "I am overwhelmed. I do not know what to do. I need help."
And that vulnerability feels like a massive risk. It feels like exposing your throat.
It is a risk. Vulnerability requires you to trust that the collective will catch you rather than exploit your weakness.
Right.
But here is the paradox. Dropping the armor is the only way someone else can reach the wound to help patch it. If you keep the titanium plating on, nobody can hurt you, but nobody can heal you either.
Wow. The transition from individual to collective resilience requires trading the exhausting illusion of invulnerability for the messy, grounded reality of mutual support.
Exactly.
Okay, so this is all incredibly profound theoretical groundwork. We've redefined resilience from a static wall to a dynamic, swaying tree. We've replaced the grit of the lone wolf with the recovery and reconnection of the collective.
We've covered a lot of theory.
But the genius of the Inner Horizon material is that it doesn't leave us floating in the clouds of abstract sociology and neuroscience.
No, it gets very tactical.
Right. It recognizes that when you are waking up on a Tuesday morning, absolutely paralyzed by anxiety over a failing project or a personal crisis, you don't need a lecture on the vagus nerve.
You need to know what to do with your hands.
Exactly. You need a tactical blueprint. And the material provides exactly that. A highly specific, deceptively simple, three-step, daily practice for building the mechanics of momentum.
This is where the philosophy becomes a daily utility.
Let's walk through it.
The source outlines an exercise designed to build the cognitive muscle of resilience. It is meant to be done quickly, ideally with a pen and paper to engage the motor cortex.
Step 1. Identify one challenge you are currently facing.
Simple enough.
Step 2. Write down 3 strengths you have used in the past to overcome difficulties.
Okay.
And step 3. Choose one small action you can take today to move forward.
On the surface, that sounds like a standard journal prompt you'd find on a motivational calendar.
Right, it sounds almost too basic.
Yeah.
But when you look at the psychological architecture behind it, it is a highly calibrated tool for interrupting a panic spiral.
Because the core philosophy here is that resilience isn't about solving the entire massive problem at once.
It's about taking the next step and then the next. Persistence over perfection.
Let's break down the cognitive mechanics of each step, because there is a very deliberate intervention happening at each stage.
Let's do it. Step 1. Identify one challenge you are currently facing.
The operative word here is identify, and the secondary operative word is one.
Why is one so important?
When we are under high stress, the brain enters a state of globalized anxiety. We don't just feel stressed about a looming deadline, the anxiety bleeds into everything.
Oh, I know that feeling.
We feel a vague, nebulous sense of doom, that our career is failing, our relationships are deteriorating, and life is generally just falling apart. It's an amorphous cloud of threat.
It's the feeling of waking up at 3 a.m. with your heart pounding, but you can't even pinpoint exactly what you're afraid of. Everything just feels dangerous.
Precisely. That is the amygdala overriding the prefrontal cortex. By forcing yourself to write down and identify one specific challenge, you're forcing the prefrontal cortex back online.
You are engaging the logical brain.
In psychology, there is a concept popularized by Dr. Dan Siegel called name it to tame it.
Name it to tame it. I like that.
The act of applying language and narrative structure to an emotional state literally decreases the electrical activity in the fear centers of the brain.
So you are drawing a boundary around the monster.
You are taking it from an infinite, overwhelming cloud of doom and turning it into a finite, measurable problem on a piece of paper.
You are turning on the lights in the basement. When the lights are off, every shadow is a monster ready to eat you. But when you turn on the lights, when you name the problem, you realize it's not a monster. It's just a massive, ugly pile of laundry on a chair.
That is exactly it.
It's still a chore, it's still annoying, and you still have to deal with it, but it is no longer an existential threat to your life. You have contained the threat.
And once the threat is contained, you move to step 2, which is arguably the most complex psychological intervention of the exercise.
Step 2. Write down 3 strengths you have used in the past to overcome difficulties.
When you are in the middle of a crisis, your brain suffers from a highly specific type of state-dependent memory loss.
Wait, really?
Yes. Because you feel incompetent and helpless right now, your brain struggles to retrieve any memories of times when you felt competent and powerful. It filters out your successes.
You completely forget your own resume of survival.
Exactly. You literally can't remember being strong. This step forces a manual override of that filter.
It demands that you search your autobiographical memory for empirical, historical evidence of your own capability.
It generates immediate, grounded confidence to combat the acute feeling of helplessness.
But I want to debate the mechanics of this step for a second. Why is the instruction specifically mandate finding 3 past strengths?
That's a great question.
Because if you are exhausted and panicked, finding one past success is hard enough. Why make the barrier to entry higher by demanding 3? Does forcing yourself to find multiple examples serve a specific neurological purpose? Like, does it prevent you from writing off your past survival as a fluke?
You are hitting on the exact mechanism at play. Human beings are hardwired with a negativity bias.
Right.
From an evolutionary perspective, our ancestors survived by paying much closer attention to threats, the rustle in the bushes that might be a tiger, than to positive stimuli like a beautiful sunset.
We are wired to look for the bad.
We give disproportionate weight to negative data. If you only force yourself to recall one past strength, your highly anxious brain will immediately look for ways to discredit it.
It will say, oh, I only survived that layoff in 2018 because I got lucky.
Or I only got through that breakup because my friends carried me. Your brain dismisses a single data point as a statistical outlier.
It's an anomaly.
Right, it's just an anomaly. But when you force yourself to identify 3 distinct strengths or 3 separate historical instances of overcoming adversity, you mathematically break through that cognitive bias.
Because in research and in human perception, 1 point is an anomaly. 2 points could be a coincidence. But 3 points establishes an undeniable pattern.
You're forcing your brain to act like a defense attorney presenting irrefutable evidence to a jury.
Exhibit A. I navigated a massive career pivot using my adaptability. Exhibit B. I managed a family health crisis using my capacity for extreme organization. Exhibit C. I handled a public failure using my sense of humor.
By requiring 3, you prove to yourself that your resilience is an ingrained character trait, not a trick of luck.
3 data points makes a trend line. And once you have established that trend line of your own undeniable capability, you arrive at step 3.
Choose one small action to take today to move forward.
And the magic of this step is in the word small. Because when we face a massive structural challenge, like having to find a completely new job or rebuilding a life after a divorce, we often enter a state of paralysis because we assume the solution must be as massive as the problem itself.
And attempting a massive solution requires an enormous amount of cognitive load and executive function.
Which, as we've established, are severely depleted when you are under stress.
By shrinking the requirement to one small action, you drastically reduce the cognitive load to a manageable level. You aren't asking your exhausted brain to map out a 5-year recovery plan.
You are just asking it to perform one micro task.
Exactly.
I just love how microscopic this is. It takes this vast, intimidating philosophical concept of post-traumatic growth, and it shrinks it down so small it fits on a single Post-it note.
It makes it accessible.
You don't have to fix your whole life today. You don't even have to fix the whole problem today. You just have to draft one email and not even send it.
Or you just make one 5-minute phone call.
Or take 10 minutes to clear the garbage off your desk so you have a clean workspace for tomorrow.
There is a psychological principle called the Zeigarnik effect.
The Zeigarnik effect.
Yes, which basically states that uncompleted tasks occupy constant draining background processing power in our brains.
Like leaving too many tabs open on your browser.
Exactly like that. By taking one small action, you create a sense of completion, however minor. This triggers a micro-release of dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with reward and motivation.
And that dopamine provides the chemical momentum needed to take the next small step tomorrow.
You are literally building momentum with neurochemistry.
If we tie this all the way back to the primary metaphor from the beginning of the material, the tree in the heavy wind, that one small action is the tree beginning its very slow, agonizingly gradual sway back toward center.
It's the physical act of returning upright.
Right, because when a massive storm passes, the tree doesn't magically and violently snap back to a perfectly straight, upright position in 1 second.
That would break the trunk.
It slowly, millimeter by millimeter, rights itself. The small action is that first millimeter of movement away from the ground. It is the initiation of momentum.
It is the practical application of adaptability. You aren't leaping, you are shifting your weight. And over time, those micro shifts compound into total recovery.
So what does this all mean? This material has essentially offered us a complete teardown and rebuild of how we engage with the friction of life.
A totally new framework.
We are walking away from this deep dive with a fundamentally new operating system. Let's trace the arc of what we've unpacked today. First, we completely discarded the armor.
Resilience is not the rigid, impenetrable wall. It is the tree swaying in the wind.
Adaptability and the willingness to feel the impact will beat unyielding stoicism every single time. Second, we redefined the goal.
It is not about white-knuckling your way through trauma with sheer grit. It is about engaging in the deliberate biological process of recovery.
Falling down is not a failure. It is the required starting point for rising. Third, we shattered the myth of the lone wolf.
True resilience is a team sport.
It is built on the vulnerability of reaching out and the neurological co-regulation of the collective. And finally, the actual mechanics of bouncing back are not grand, heroic leaps.
They are the micro steps. Naming the storm, proving your past competence with 3 data points, and taking one microscopic action to generate dopamine and momentum.
And the researchers behind this module leave us with a profound synthesis of all these concepts. They suggest that every setback we face, no matter how painful, is not a final judgment on our worth or our fixed abilities.
Rather, it viewed through the lens of adaptability, setbacks are actually invitations.
Invitations.
Yes, they are environmental stress tests inviting us to alter our structure, to deepen our roots, to reach out to the surrounding forest, and ultimately to grow into a more complex, wiser, and more compassionate architecture.
And before we wrap up, there is a truly fascinating breadcrumb that the host of the Inner Horizon drops right at the very end of their notes.
Oh, the teaser for the next topic.
Yes. As they sign off on this module about resilience, they mention that the next frontier of this kind of psychological growth, the next logical topic they plan to explore, is the concept of forgiveness.
Forgiveness.
Specifically, they highlight the profound psychological freedom that comes from the act of letting go.
It is a brilliant and honestly an inevitable transition for them to make.
Because forgiveness ties perfectly into the physics of rigidity that we've spent this entire time discussing.
Exactly. We talked about letting go of the need to be an unbreakable wall of steel in the present moment, but forgiveness is the ultimate act of letting go of emotional rigidity regarding the past.
When we hold on to deep resentments, or we fixate on how a crisis shouldn't have happened, we are engaging in a cognitive sunk cost fallacy.
We are using massive amounts of present-day energy to stubbornly fight against a historical reality that we physically cannot change.
Forgiveness is the cognitive flexibility to stop fighting the ghost of the storm.
It's dropping the armor of resentment.
It's allowing the tree to finally stop bracing against a wind that stopped blowing 5 years ago. It's incredibly profound, and it shows just how deeply interconnected all these concepts of mental health, trauma recovery, and personal growth really are. They're all just different expressions of flexibility.
Indeed. The flexible mind survives. The rigid mind shatters.
We have covered a massive expanse of ground today, completely deconstructing the mythology of what it means to be strong. But as we finish, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final, lingering thought to turn over in your mind.
A thought that builds entirely on the biomechanics of the tree metaphor we've explored today, but pushes into territory the text leaves open.
Exactly. We've established that the strongest trees in the forest bend in the wind, they absorb the kinetic energy, and they eventually return upright. But think about the biology of that process. When a tree survives a truly massive, life-altering storm, and the wind finally dies down, and it finally stops swaying and finds its center again, is it the exact same tree? The answer is no. The stress wood, the micro-tears, the new density of the roots, they physically alter the organism. If true resilience is about adapting, reconnecting, and engaging in the messy process of recovery, maybe the ultimate goal isn't to bounce back to exactly who you were before the challenge hit.
There is no going back to the naive state before the wind.
Maybe true resilience means accepting that the storm has permanently, fundamentally changed your shape. And instead of mourning the perfectly straight, untested trunk you used to have, true strength is finding the profound, earned beauty in the complex, weathered architecture of how you've grown because of the storm. Take a moment today, grab a pen, and try that 3-step exercise. Write down your 3 strengths, take your one small action, find your center. We will see you next time.